Today I would like to knock out 3 prompts for my watercolor journaling list. If you would like to join me, why don't you grab your watercolor journal, go ahead and grab all of the supplies that I talked about last week so that you can do your watercolor journaling with me. So let me just grab all the stuff. I got some stuff over there too. Let's go. Oh, forgot this. So we're going to cover prompt 1 first, and that's know your palette. It's important to know your palette, whatever paint you decide that you're going to use, because it's a great reference for you while you're working in your journal. Now, if you have different paints that you're going to use, you should probably make a paint palette for each of them. And I always recommend doing it in the start of your book. So today we're going to be using this Winsor & Newton Traveler's Watercolor kit, and it does come with the water brush, just lays right in there. And I already have a water inside of the brush that we will be using, but I also put a glass of water here. I have my flat brush and an 8, I think it's an 8, yeah, an 8 round, and then my pencil that we may use later, and then of course my paper towel. So I recommend that you start right in the front, on the front page of your watercolor journal. Now you may decide that, like I said, you may decide that you want to use more than one palette, and that's totally fine. But this will give you a reference to whatever palette that you are using. I'm going to turn it to the side, and actually I'm going to bring this down here. So that we can lay out the palette just like it is in the tray. So I'm going to do this first row of 6 up at the top, and then the second row of 6 down at the bottom. Now you can take a pencil and a ruler, and you can draw out the different squares that you want to use. That's totally fine. I'm just going to use my eye. But remember, and in the page, I'll bring it up really quick, but prompt 1, know your palette. So you're going to start on page 1 of your watercolor journal and paint out the reference palette for your paints. This involves really easy steps. Like I said, you can feel free to lightly mark out your guidelines, or you can just eye it and apply your paint in one color at a time. And then I recommend that you label each one so that you can reference those colors. An extra tip is to add them as shapes, rectangles, circles. You can do strokes, so brush strokes. And you can also draw objects and fill them in if you want to. So here's an example. The other day I drew out all of the little tubes, and then I filled each one in with the color. Now I just drew these out and then painted them in, and actually I then made it as a TikTok, and I also put it out as a reel on my Instagram if you want to go check that out. But you can get creative with how you're going to put your paint palette down. You can do it however you want, however you feel comfortable. It could be little blotches of paint, circles, shapes, or like I did, I drew out the paint that I'm going to use in this journal. So the whole idea is to have fun, but to have a reference that you can look back on. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start at the top. Now it is a white, and so it's not going to show up very well. So I'm going to actually kind of sketch out a palette there, and that's just, or a palette. I'm just going to sketch out a rectangle there for my white. Now I don't need to necessarily use this water. I've got water in here. I can squeeze and add a couple of drops of pure white pigment and just pick that up and fill in my rectangle space. Now again, you're probably wondering, well, you can't even see it, but it's good to include the white on your palette as well. Okay, so I'm just going to rinse that off. With the water brush, you just squeeze and kind of push it back and forth on the paper towel and it comes clean. And I'm going to speed up the process so that we can get the palette complete. Okay, so now I have my entire palette laid out here. I am going to let this dry and then I will label each one. If you would like your palette to dry a little faster, you can use a blow dryer to speed up the process. Let's go on to prompt number 2. These are the basic techniques that you will find with watercolor. These are foundational. You will use them again and again, and once you get them down, you'll feel more and more comfortable using them and applying them to your pieces. So the basic technique, part 1, is going to cover wet on wet and wet on dry. With wet on wet, you're going to start with clean water on your brush, and you're going to add it to any shape on your paper. Fill your brush with paint and add it to the shape that you have made with water. The paint will spread through the clean water onto the surface. I'm squeezing the water out of my brush and making a rectangle of water. So you can see that the pigment only goes where I had laid down that water. It doesn't go anywhere else. So it only goes up to the edge of where that water is, kind of like a barrier. So working with the analogous colors, you can see that it does blend and creates other colors. So we are applying the wet paint onto the wet surface. And it does spread and flow, as you can see, throughout that space that we put down the water. Okay, wet on dry. So this time I'm going to use colors on the color wheel that are still analogous colors, but they're going to be on the cooler side. So I'm going to use the turquoise first. And I'm going to get my brush filled with that color, but I'm going to keep the surface dry this time and I'm going to apply that paint. Now what you'll find is a little bit different is that the paint goes where I put down my brush. And it doesn't spread like it did on the wet on wet. So it only goes where I have placed my brush down onto the paper. Now I'm going to go for my ultramarine blue. I'm going to go right up against that color, but still just painting where wet on dry, on this dry paper. Okay, and last I'm going to pick up my Deoxide Violet, and I'm going to finish off my square. I'm sorry, rectangle. So as you can see, the benefit of this is that you have a little bit more control about where that paint is going to go. Unlike the wet on wet, where it's going to flow into all of those places, different places, but it is going to stay confined within that wet area that you have laid down. So once this has dried, it would be a benefit to label these sections as well. But let's go on to prompt number 3, where we have the basic technique part 2. This is going to be the flat wash and the underpainting or glazing. When you do a flat wash, you typically use a flat brush. So typically I would use a flat brush, but I'm going to show you that you are able to create a wash, a flat wash with your water brush. So with the flat wash, we're going to start at the top of the paper here, and we're going to work our way down so that I can show you how to get that, that flat wash. It is best when you do a wash to tilt your paper, but before I tilt my paper, I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to soak up some of this water from the wet on wet technique. Will also help it to dry faster. But you can certainly let it dry all the way. I just know that when I go to tip my art journal up, then all of that paint is going to kind of drop. So I'm going to do that. So you can hold it up at a slight angle in order to get your flat wash. I'm going to go with the sap green. I'm going to add a couple of drops of water in there and get it nice and wet. Now typically when you make a flat wash, you're going to want to take it over to your palette. And you're going to want a lot of that color. So if you're mixing, for example, for a flat wash, you want to make sure that you have plenty of that color so that you can have that same color from the top all the way to the bottom. Okay, so tilt this forward, and what's going to happen is there's going to be a bead of paint that forms, and then when you go back in, you're going to go right over that bead and it's going to push its way down. Then I go over the bead again and it pushes its way down. So every time I'm going over that area, I want to make sure that my brush touches that bead of paint as I work my way down. If it doesn't touch that bead of paint, then you're not going to get an even wash going all the way down. And what you want to avoid is any streakiness, because you want it to be as flat as possible. So let's try that again with a different color so that you can see it one more time. This time, let's do it with the ultramarine blue. And I'm going to fill up that pan with a lot of water. So as you can see, if you start from the top and you work your way down, you can get that even flat wash even with a water brush. You just have to keep adding water and then going back and picking up that bead of water that's at the bottom. Because when you angle it down, then all of that paint is going to kind of fall down. So it is possible to get that flat wash with a water brush. Now let me show you with the flat brush. Since this isn't a water brush, I'm going to need a lot of extra water. So I'm going to add some water back here in the back. And I want to make sure that I have plenty of color. So this will be the color that I'm using. Okay, and then I'm going to start at the top. And you see how it beads? Then you're just going to go over that. You're going to go over it again. Over it again. Over it again. All the way down to the bottom. Now when it does, you can go back over it if you want it to be a little bit darker, but remember, you're working that paint down and it's going to all gather here at the bottom. Then all you got to do is dry it off and then soak it up. Wait till it gets all the way down there. And then soak that up. Okay, so there's my 3 washes. The first 2 are done with the water brush. The second one is, or the third one, sorry, is done with the flat brush. And as you can probably see, this first one and the third one are probably the best. This one's a little streaky. I did go back through it with my water brush so that you can see it does create some streaks if you do go back through it. But if you start from the top and go down, you will get that nice even color from the top to the bottom. And that is called a flat wash. So the next thing that I'm going to work on is the underpainting and glazing. So this is when you lay down a transparent wash on paper, rendering your subject. This can be any subject, a flower, a glass, a vase, a bicycle, anything. And then you're going to let that dry completely. Then you're going to glaze or add another layer on top of that, creating shadows and dimension, and you're going to let each layer dry in between applications. I'm going to start by drawing out a jar, and I'm going to use this turquoise color. Okay, so now that this has dried completely, we're going to go in with the glazing. So this is a monochromatic glaze, so we're going to be using the same color. And what you're going to focus on now are all the parts that you want dark. So glazing just means that you're going to be adding a second layer over the top of what you have already put down. And glazing can create nice shadows and contrast within your piece that you're working on. Okay, so now this is dry, and we're going to go in with a third layer, same color, and just going back over the top. Now what's this going to do? It's going to create even darker sections with the paint that you have already laid down. Everything that is under this, it kind of builds on top of each other, and so you're going to be seeing the different layers there of the 3 different colors in the jar. Okay, all right, so now we've gone over those 3 prompts. We're going to put it all together over here on this page. So just besides the first one, besides the palette, I'm going to combine a wet wash, a wet on wet, a wet on dry, the flat wash, and glazing over here. And I'm just gonna speed this up so that you can see the process, and I will put in the different parts so that you can tell what I'm doing for that. Okay, so there you go. Just by glazing on top of the leaves, monochromatic color by monochromatic color. Now what that means is a green on top of a green. You can use the same color green, or you can darken it up like I did going back into it. Same with this. These are all greens, even though I got into, I used the Payne's Gray right here and mixed it with the green so that I could get, oh, you can't see that. Let me pull that down. And then in here I did all purples and blue with the wash. So there is the final. I hope that you enjoyed this process of doing the prompts. I'm going to do the next 3 prompts on my prompt list next week, so if you want to come back and join me for that, I would love to have you. Always remember that we should sign our work. So what I usually do is sign it and date it. So that I can go back and I can see when I did that. Now obviously this is going to be my 2022 journal, but I still like to date it. You just never know. Like I would probably label this one Glazing. And remember, this is underlaying and glazing, so then you could put that down here. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys had so much fun going through those 3 prompts with me. If you haven't downloaded the entire prompt list, make sure that you go to the link below. It is on my website at myartpixie.com. You can grab that list and you can start working in your watercolor journal. I am going to be doing some more videos that include other prompts on the list, so be looking for that, because then you can kind of see how I do those prompts, and you can fill up your watercolor journal in no time. Once you fill up your first watercolor journal, you're going to feel amazing. You have accomplished a great task of just getting over that hurdle, that fear of watercolor. And just like I talked about in last week's video, using a watercolor journal is a great way for you to learn watercolor in small, bite-sized pieces. And that way, when you do decide that you're going to work on a bigger piece, you have those techniques that you've practiced in your watercolor journal. And that's what this is all about. A watercolor journal is about practicing. So just remember that this is for you to have fun and to relax and enjoy the process. Until next time, bye!